Hello everyone, I'm H.A.K, and if you want to know what that stands for and what in the world it has to do with my intro, feel free to ask me. Well, looks like we have another Tim Burton movie to face this year, aside from Dark Shadows. This time it's Frankenweenie, which is apparently based off of a short film that Tim Burton made in like the mid-80s or so. So today I went to see that movie with my friend Blaine, but shortly before that happened, like half an hour before he picked me up to go see the movie, I quickly watched the short films of Frankenweenies to know what to expect and what to bear in mind, stuff like that, for the movie. So without further ado, here's basically my review for both the short and the full-length films of Frankenweenie. So the story of both films is, wait, if you do not want to know what the story is, that's fine. Just go to this particular section in the timeline so you can skip this. Anyway, the story is about this boy named Victor who has this dog named Sparky. And they're pretty much, best of pals and all that stuff. But then Sparky gets hit by a car and dies, leaving Victor heartbroken for his loss. But after learning a couple of things about electricity and stuff like that from his science class at school, he decides to do a bunch of research about bringing things to life to the dead, and eventually works out a way where he brings Sparky back to life. But then eventually the town finds out that he brought back Sparky to life, and things start to get chaotic from there. Okay, so let's talk about the short film first. On a whole, it was nice. It was plain, it was simple, it was pretty straightforward on a whole. I guess the real issue I had with it was that it was a little too much like Frankenstein. I mean, yes, it's based on Frankenstein, or the general idea is basically Frankenstein with, resurrecting Sparky and everything. But it felt like it was still telling us a short story of literally Frankenstein, even after Sparky was resurrected. Although one thing I find really messed up with this movie is that it has Sofia Coppola, as in the woman that plays Maria Corleone in Godfather Part 3. You know, that character in that movie that doesn't exist? Yeah, it really messed with my brain too. Keeps you really itchy and melty feeling with your frontal lobe, doesn't it? So anyway, it's like Frankenstein a lot more than I think it probably should be, and Sofia Coppola's in there, which is always going to mess up with your mind when you think about it. But it's still a nice, simple, short film that is fairly enjoyable. So, altogether, I give that one a 65% out of 100. Okay, so the full-length film. Now, originally, when I first saw the trailer to this film, I had very low expectations of it. Not like razzy low, but I wasn't too confident about it. I thought it was going to be a dumb kids movie that was going to be just predictable as frick. And I felt that way more when I watched the short film, because it seemed like Tim Burton should have left the idea alone, considering it didn't need more, in my opinion at the time, considering all the just plain niceness and all-around simplicity to the idea of Frankenweenie. But for what it's worth, I turned out to be completely wrong. I mean, yes, the first half of the film is really telling what we already know from like the first 18 minutes or whatever of the short film. So it was nothing particularly different. But even during that, they started to give us these supporting characters that were actually rather interesting. Not the most unique characters you're ever going to meet, but they were pretty fun and amusing. The animation itself was pretty good, although I have to say, when it comes to that science teacher, both when it comes to the character himself, but mostly when it comes to the animation, I thought that guy was creepy as frick. Now, while the idea of what they came up with for the second half wasn't entirely explained and still had one or two cliches, I was willing to buy it. I thought what Tim Burton came up with to actually make it a full-length film, with the idea that he made for basically the climax of the entire film, was not super original, but rather clever for what it's worth. So I would say that the full-length film was better because it was clever, it was more thought of, it was more developed, I think would be the better way to put it. And it had more characters for us to focus on besides just Victor and Sparky and his parents and the entire neighborhood and everything. Plus, it did have a couple of bits of comedy that I admit were fairly cute, so yeah. So yes, this movie was predictable in some areas and it had a fair share of cliches, but in my opinion it gets away with it with still being fun and in some areas clever when it comes to the second half of the film. And also that there are one or two cliches that I didn't use that I personally really like that they didn't, because I thought if they did use these particular cliches, that would have been really stupid. So altogether, I would give the full-length movie of Frankenweenie a 75% out of 100. Now, if you want to see more of my videos, feel free to check them out on my video. But if you want to see more reviews, feel free to log on to my blog at hacksreviews.blogspot.com, where I have hundreds of reviews that you can read and enjoy. Until then, everyone, I am Hack. And if you want to know what that stands for and what in the world it has to do with my intro, feel free to ask me.